Greetings, my friends, that I welcome you to this journey through time, where I will recount the story of my life, my struggles, my triumphs, and ultimately, my brief but significant role as the ninth President of the United States. You may already know me for one reason above all others, that my presidency was the shortest in American history. But I was more than a man who served just 31 days in office. My story begins decades before that cold March day in 1841. It is the tale of a soldier, a frontier leader, a statesman, and a man shaped by the young republic's trials. I was born into a world of revolution and transformation, a world where the colonies had just begun to declare themselves free from Britain's rule. My family was deeply rooted in that struggle, and from my earliest days, I was surrounded by the ideals of liberty, sacrifice, and public duty. In the course of this account, I shall take you with me, from my childhood home in Virginia, to the rugged battlefields of the Northwest Territory, to the halls of Congress, and finally to the White House. Along the way, you will see the America that I saw, a land torn by conflict, yet bursting with promise, a people divided in their interests, yet united in their pursuit of independence and self-government. This is not merely a story about William Henry Harrison, the man. It is also about America in its formative years, its struggles with native peoples, its debates over power and governance, and its rising voice on the world stage. So, let us begin. Let us journey back to the year 1773, to my birthplace along the banks of the James River in Virginia. That is where my life began, and where the seeds of my destiny were first planted. I was born on February 9th, 1773, at Berkeley Plantation, a large estate along the James River in Charles City County, Virginia. The world into which I entered was one of great uncertainty, for the colonies were on the brink of revolution. The very year of my birth, men in Boston hurled tea into the harbor to protest against British rule. My infancy coincided with the dawn of American independence. My father, Benjamin Harrison V., was no ordinary man. He was a prominent Virginia planter and a patriot. In 1776, he affixed his bold signature to the Declaration of Independence, standing alongside men like Thomas Jefferson and John Adams. My father's dedication to liberty was not mere rhetoric. He risked everything, his fortune, his lands, his family's safety, for the cause of freedom. Growing up under his roof, I learned that public service and sacrifice for one's country were not optional. They were duties. My mother, Elizabeth Bassett Harrison, was the quiet strength of our family. She came from a respected Virginia lineage, and she taught me humility, faith, and perseverance. While my father was engaged in politics and the revolution, it was my mother who nurtured me with steadfast love and instilled in me the virtues of patience and moral duty. That I was the youngest of 7 children, and being the last-born came with its own peculiarities. My older brothers and sisters were already steeped in the expectations of leadership, marriage, and responsibility, but for me, the world seemed larger, less confined, more open to adventure. My family's estate, with its vast fields and the rolling waters of the James River, was my playground. I remember the smell of tobacco curing in the barns, the sight of laborers tending the fields, and the ever-present hum of political conversation at the dinner table. Visitors to Berkeley Plantation were often distinguished figures: planters, legislators, military officers. As a boy, I listened intently to their discussions about independence, governance, and the future of the colonies. Though I was too young to fully grasp the depth of their debates, I absorbed their passion. These early exposures planted in me a seed of ambition, a calling to serve in the arena of public life. Yet, like many families in Virginia, ours was not untouched by the institution of slavery. The fields that sustained our wealth were worked by enslaved laborers. It is a truth that casts a shadow upon the legacy of so many of my generation. As a child, I accepted it as part of the order of life in Virginia, but in time, I would come to wrestle with the moral contradictions of liberty proclaimed for some and denied to others. When I was still a boy, my father's responsibilities grew heavier. He went on to serve as the governor of Virginia, and our household became even more closely tied to the affairs of the young republic. My childhood was never one of carefree innocence. It was one shaped by the birth pains of a nation and the expectations placed upon a son of a founding family. I did not yet know what path my life would take. whether in law, politics, or the military, but I knew one thing clearly: I was destined to serve. From my earliest days, the ideals of honor, duty, and devotion to country were as much a part of me as the very air I breathed on the banks of the James River. As I grew into my teenage years, the world around me was changing rapidly. The revolution had ended, the United States had emerged victorious, and now the great challenge was to sustain this fragile new republic. For a young man like me, born into a family of patriots and planters, expectations ran high. At first, my father envisioned a career in medicine for me. He believed that with my intellect and my curiosity, I could become a physician, a man of science who would bring healing and respect to the family name. In those days, medicine was still an uncertain profession, yet it was considered honorable and useful for a gentleman of Virginia to prepare me. My education was placed in the hands of private tutors and later at Hampton-Sydney College, a small but rigorous institution founded in 1775. There, I studied Latin and Greek, delved into the classical writers, and read history, philosophy, and moral sciences. My days were filled with lectures and debate, and though I was not always the most disciplined student, I found myself drawn to the larger questions. What is the nature of government? How should men live in society? What is the duty of a citizen to his nation? But before my studies could fully take root, fate struck a heavy blow. My father passed away in 1791 when I was just 18 years old. His death was not only a personal loss, but also a turning point in my life. The support he had provided was gone, and the financial circumstances of my family grew uncertain. Suddenly, the path toward becoming a physician, with its years of study and expense, seemed unattainable. It was then that opportunity appeared from an unexpected quarter: the military. The young United States, still expanding westward, faced constant conflict with native tribes who resisted the encroachment of settlers on their lands. President George Washington, whom my father had once stood beside in the Continental Congress, was seeking young men of ability and courage to join the Army. Through the help of family connections and influential friends, I received a commission as an ensign in the 1st Infantry of the United States Army in 1791. I was only 18 years old, barely a man, and yet I was stepping into a profession that would define much of my life. Leaving Virginia for the frontier was like stepping into another world. The Northwest Territory, stretching across what is now Ohio, Indiana, Illinois, and beyond, was wild and untamed. Dense forests, wide rivers, and scattered settlements marked the land, but it was also a place of continual tension and violence. Native tribes, determined to protect their homelands, resisted the advance of American settlers. The Army was tasked with enforcing the authority of the new republic and securing these contested lands. My arrival as a young officer was both exhilarating and terrifying. I knew little of war beyond the stories I had heard from veterans of the Revolution, and now I was to face it myself. The life of a soldier was harsh: long marches through the wilderness, crude campsites, meager rations, and constant danger from ambush. But there was also a sense of purpose. I was no longer merely the son of a signer of the Declaration. I was now an officer of the United States Army, charged with defending the frontier. In those early years, I began to learn the discipline of command, the necessity of quick decision-making, and the value of courage under fire. The frontier was my school, and war would become my teacher. My youth had ended abruptly, and in its place began a life of service, one that would carry me from ensign to general, from soldier to statesman. When I first set foot in the Northwest Territory, I felt as though I had entered another world. Gone were the tobacco fields of Virginia and the stately homes of the James River. In their place stretched vast forests, wild rivers, endless prairies, and isolated settlements carved out by pioneers who sought new beginnings. It was a land of beauty, yes, but also of danger. The United States government had claimed this territory after the Treaty of Paris in 1783, but the native tribes who had lived upon this land for generations did not recognize that treaty. To them, these forests and rivers were their ancestral homes, not land to be surrendered to a distant Congress in Philadelphia. Shawnee, Miami, Delaware, and many others stood united in their determination to resist American settlement. As a young officer, I was thrust into this struggle. My first real trial came under General Mad Anthony Wang, a stern but brilliant commander who was determined to bring order and discipline to the army. Under his leadership, I learned not only the art of war, but also the patience of preparation. General Wayne was relentless in drilling his men, and though we grumbled at the endless marches and harsh discipline, we soon saw the wisdom in his methods that I remember vividly the Battle of Fallen Timbers in 1794. The forest had been shattered by a storm, leaving great trees strewn across the ground, as though nature itself had built a fortress. It was there that our forces met the confederation of tribes in a decisive clash. Amid smoke and musket fire, I witnessed the fury of combat, the cries of the wounded, and the chaos that only a battlefield can bring. Yet I also saw discipline triumph over disorder. Our forces prevailed, and the victory opened the way for the Treaty of Greenville, which brought a temporary peace to the frontier. During these years, I came to understand the complexity of the struggle. The native warriors we fought were not mere obstacles. They were men of courage, fighting for their families and their way of life. I respected their bravery, even as I opposed their cause. It was a lesson I carried with me always, that conflict is rarely simple, and that those we call enemies are often driven by the same desires for survival and dignity that stir in our own hearts. Life on the frontier was not solely about battle. I spent long months stationed at forts, Fort Washington in Cincinnati, Fort Greenville, and others scattered along the edge of settlement. These outposts were crude wooden stockades, manned by weary soldiers and surrounded by wilderness. There were nights of bitter cold, when the wind whistled through the cracks of our cabins, and mornings when we rose to find snow blanketing the earth like a shroud. Supplies were often scarce, and sickness stalked our ranks as fiercely as any enemy. And yet, in those years, I began to earn the trust of my fellow officers and the men under my command. I studied tactics, I observed leadership, and I sought to prove myself not only as a fighter, but as a man capable of responsibility. When General Wayne recognized my abilities, I was appointed as his aide-de-camp, a role that allowed me to see the inner workings of command and to learn from one of the finest military minds of the AG. By the timepiece was secured on the frontier, I was no longer the untested youth who had left Virginia. I had become a soldier hardened by experience, tempered by hardship, and awakened to the realities of both war and diplomacy. The Northwest Territory had shaped me, and it prepared me for the next chapter of my life, a chapter that would draw me away from the battlefield and into the realm of governance. After years of service on the frontier, I found my path turning from the field of battle toward the arena of politics and governance. The young republic was expanding, and with expansion came new responsibilities, new lands to govern, new settlers to protect, and new questions about how the United States would shape its destiny. That I left active military service in 1798, but the lessons I carried from the Northwest remained etched into my soul. That same year, I was appointed Secretary of the Northwest Territory. It was my first taste of civil administration, and I quickly learned that politics required a different sort of courage than battle. Instead of bullets and bayonets, one faced debates, arguments, and the endless weight of compromise. Not long afterward, I was chosen to represent the territory in Congress. At just 26 years of age, I was the youngest delegate in the House of Representatives. Many in Virginia and beyond may have still seen me as a boy, but I was determined to prove my worth. I threw myself into the debates over land policy, for I knew from experience how desperately the settlers on the frontier sought clear titles to their farms. I fought for measures that would make land more affordable and accessible, believing that America's strength lay in the hands of independent farmers. My work in Congress caught the attention of President John Adams. In 1801, he entrusted me with a task that would define the next 12 years of my life. He appointed me governor of the Indiana Territory. It was a vast and untamed region, encompassing what would one day become Indiana, Illinois, Michigan, Wisconsin, and parts of Minnesota. To govern such a land was no small responsibility, and I accepted it with a mixture of pride and apprehension. As governor, I held broad powers, civil, judicial, and military. I was charged with organizing the territory, negotiating with native tribes, overseeing the distribution of land, and ensuring the safety of settlers. Yet each of these duties carried its own trials. Perhaps my most difficult task was dealing with the native tribes. I believed, as many of my time did, that treaties could secure peace and open land for settlement. Over the years, I negotiated numerous agreements, acquiring millions of acres of land for the United States. To the settlers, I was a champion of progress, but to the tribes, I was often seen as the face of encroachment and betrayal. It was a heavy burden, for while I respected the courage and dignity of the native peoples, I also believed that the growth of the Republic was inevitable and unstoppable. Governance was not only about treaties and land, it was also about law and order. The frontier was rife with disputes between settlers and tribes, between rival claimants to land, between men who sought justice and those who resisted it. I presided over courts, issued decrees, and worked tirelessly to bring stability to a region that often seemed beyond the reach of LAW. These years, I came to see myself not just as a soldier of the Republic, but as a statesman. The challenges I faced required more than bravery. They required judgment, diplomacy, and patience. My name began to spread beyond the territory, carried by the stories of my governance and my determination to bring civilization to the frontier. But even as I sought peace, a storm was brewing. A confederation of native tribes, inspired by the Shawnee leader Tecumseh and his brother, the prophet Tenskwatawa, was rising in resistance to American expansion. The treaties I had signed, the lands I had opened, all of these became fuel for their cause. It was clear that my governorship would not remain confined to diplomacy alone. Once again, the path of my life was leading me back toward the clash of arms. As governor of the Indiana Territory, I knew that treaties alone would never settle the question of land and sovereignty. Many tribes had signed agreements, ceding land to the United States. But not all accepted these terms, and among the most defiant was the Shawnee leader Tecumseh and his brother, the prophet Tenskwatawa. Tecumseh was no ordinary adversary. He was a man of vision, a warrior who saw clearly that only by uniting the tribes could the native peoples hope to resist the relentless advance of American settlement. His eloquence stirred hearts, and his defiance gave hope to many who had grown weary of broken promises. Though I respected his talents, I could not allow his confederation to grow unchecked. For if he succeeded, the very future of the Republic's expansion into the West would be imperiled. In 1811, intelligence reached me that Tecumseh was away in the South, seeking to rally additional tribes to his cause. His absence left Prophetstown, the stronghold of his movement, under the leadership of his brother, Tenskwatawa. It was a moment of opportunity, and I resolved to act. I gathered a force of about 1,000 men, regular soldiers and militia alike, and set out toward Prophetstown. The march was grueling. We cut through wilderness and swamp, advancing cautiously, aware that at any moment we might be ambushed. The air was thick with tension, for all knew that confrontation was near. On the evening of November 6, 1811, we encamped near the Tippecanoe River, just a short distance from Prophetstown. I took precautions, arranging my men in a defensive formation, for though negotiations had been attempted, I did not trust the assurances of Tenskwatawa. My instincts proved correct. In the pre-dawn darkness of November 7th, the attack came. Warriors descended upon our camp with fury, their war cries piercing the night. Muskets cracked, blades flashed, and chaos engulfed the field. I recall the acrid smoke burning my lungs, the confusion of shadows in the half-light, the desperate struggle to hold our lines. But our men held firm. The discipline instilled in them carried the day. I rode among them, shouting encouragement, steadying those who faltered, directing the fight where it raged most fiercely. Hours of brutal combat passed, but by morning's light, the enemy withdrew. Prophetstown was soon abandoned, its hopes of becoming the seat of a great confederacy shattered. The cost was heavy. Many brave men fell, and the ground was stained with blood. Yet the victory was decisive. Though Tecumseh himself was absent, the defeat at Tippecanoe struck a blow against his vision of a united native resistance. For me, it cemented a reputation. Across the nation, the newspapers hailed me as the hero of Tippecanoe. From that day forward, I bore the name Old Tippecanoe, a title that would follow me for the rest of my life. That I confess, I felt pride in that moment. A soldier cannot deny the satisfaction of seeing his efforts recognized, his leadership vindicated. Yet I also knew that this was not the end of conflict. The tensions that had flared on the frontier were bound to rise again, especially as the United States moved toward another great struggle, this time not only with the tribes, but with Britain itself. Tippecanoe was not the end of my service. It was merely a chapter, a prelude to larger battles to come. But it was also the turning point that transformed me from a territorial governor into a figure of national renown. Old Tippecanoe was no longer just a soldier or a frontier administrator. I had become a symbol, one that many would later call upon when the time came for politics and power on a national stage. Tippecanoe had made my name known across the Republic. From newspapers in New England to the settlements along the Mississippi, the people now spoke of Harrison, the soldier who had stood firm on the frontier. Yet I knew that fame on the battlefield was only one path to service. The other lay in the halls of government, where the fate of the nation was debated and decided. In 1812, war with Britain erupted once again. The same empire that my father and his generation had defied was now threatening our young republic a second time. For me, the conflict was personal. Britain had long sought to stir unrest on the frontier, arming the tribes and encouraging them to resist American settlement. The blood spilled at Tippecanoe was not only the work of native warriors, but also of British influence. During the War of 1812, I was called once again to lead men in the field. Commissioned as a major general in the Kentucky militia, I commanded troops in the Northwest Theater. It was a hard-fought campaign, filled with victories and setbacks. But our greatest triumph came in 1813 at the Battle of the Thames in Upper Canada. There, our forces crushed the British and their native allies, and Tecumseh himself fell in battle. His death marked the end of a dream for a united native confederacy, and for me, it was the culmination of years of struggle on the frontier. The war brought me both honor and scrutiny. Some praised my leadership, others criticized my methods. But when the Treaty of Ghent finally ended the conflict in 1815, I could say with certainty that I had done my part to defend the Republic. I laid down my sword and turned once more toward the path of civil service. In the years that followed, I served as a representative in Congress and later as a senator from Ohio. The frontier soldier had now become a legislator, speaking not with the roar of cannons, but with the words of debate. My speeches in Congress often returned to themes I knew well: the rights of settlers, the fair distribution of land, and the security of our western borders. My service also carried me abroad. In 1828, I was appointed minister to Gran Colombia, representing the United States in a region newly freed from Spanish rule. It was a land filled with promise and turmoil, much like our own republic in its early days. I met with Simón Bolívar, the great liberator, and though I admired his courage, I also cautioned him against the dangers of centralized power. A nation, I told him, must belong to its people, not to a single man, no matter how heroic. That mission broadened my perspective. I came to see that the struggle for liberty was not unique to America. Across the world, peoples were rising to claim the same rights of self-government that my father's generation had fought for. It was a reminder that the cause of freedom is universal, and that the United States had a role to play in shaping that destiny. By the time I returned home, I was no longer merely a soldier or a governor. I was a statesman who had seen the Republic from its frontier forts to its foreign embassies. My career had carried me across lands and oceans, into battlefields and legislative chambers. Yet one path still lay before me, one final step on the journey of public service, the pursuit of the highest office in the land, the Presidency of the United States. By the late 1830s, the Republic had entered a new era of politics. The young nation had grown, spreading across the continent with new states and restless citizens. Yet with growth came division, over banks and currency, over slavery and expansion, over the very balance of power between the people and their government. Out of this turmoil arose a new political force, the Whig Party. The Whigs sought to unite those who opposed the dominance of Andrew Jackson and his Democratic successors. They believed in a strong Congress, in infrastructure to bind the states together, in commerce and enterprise that would enrich the nation. And they sought leaders who could embody these principles and inspire confidence in the people. It was in this moment that my name resurfaced. Years had passed since my triumph at Tippecanoe, yet the memory of that victory still lingered in the minds of many Americans. I was known as a man of the frontier, a soldier who had defended the nation, a figure of simple virtue and courage. To the Whigs, I was the candidate who could unite diverse factions and challenge the Democrats on common ground. In 1836, I was put forward as one of several Whig candidates, though the party had not yet consolidated its strength. I did not prevail, but the experience marked me as a man of national standing. For years later, in 1840, the Whigs resolved to rally behind a single banner, and that banner was mine. The campaign that followed was unlike anything the nation had yet seen. The Democrats mocked me, saying I was too old, that I was fit only to sit in a log cabin and drink hard cider. They intended it as an insult, but the Whigs seized upon it as a symbol. If I was a man of the log cabin, then I was a man of the people. If I drank hard cider, then I shared in the simple pleasures of every American farmer and laborer. Thus was born the Log Cabin and Hard Cider Campaign, a movement that swept across the land with songs, slogans, and parades. My image was carried on banners, my name shouted in rallies, my story told and retold as that of a humble soldier risen to serve the Republic. The Whigs transformed my life into a legend. Old Tippecanoe, the frontier hero, the people's candidate. It was a campaign of energy and spectacle, but beneath the pageantry lay real conviction. I believed that the nation needed balance, that executive power must not overshadow the voice of Congress, that the prosperity of America depended upon unity and progress. The Whigs offered that vision, and I was honored to carry it today. As the election drew near, the enthusiasm was unmistakable. The people turned out in great numbers, filling the air with chants of Tippecanoe and Tyler too. My running mate, John Tyler, joined me in presenting a message of reform and renewal. When the votes were cast, the victory was overwhelming. I won the presidency by a wide margin, carried by the faith of millions who saw in me not merely a candidate, but a symbol of the Republic's enduring strength. At 68 years of age, I had risen to the highest office in the land. From the fields of Virginia to the forts of the frontier, from Congress to foreign embassies, every step of my journey had led to this moment. Yet even as I prepared to assume the presidency, I could not have foreseen the cruel brevity of the days that awaited me in the White House. When the final results were announced, I stood humbled before the voice of the people. The election of 1840 had been one of the most spirited contests in our young nation's history, and the people had spoken with clarity. They entrusted me, William Henry Harrison, with the presidency of the United States. I was 68 years old, a veteran soldier, a public servant of many years, and a man who had seen both triumphs and hardships in the course of my life. As I looked upon the office to which I had been called, I felt not pride but solemn responsibility. This was no ordinary honor. It was the highest trust that a free people could bestow upon one of their own. As Inauguration Day approached, I pondered deeply what message I ought to deliver to the nation. Many expected a simple speech, a brief declaration of intent. Yet I resolved to speak at length, to remind Americans of the principles upon which our republic was founded, to lay bare the dangers of unchecked power, and to set forth the course that I believed would preserve liberty. On March 4, 1841, I stood before a vast crowd in Washington City. The day was cold, the wind sharp, but the people gathered in great numbers, eager to witness the ceremony. With my hand upon the Bible, I took the oath of office, pledging to preserve, protect, and defend the Constitution of the United States. Then I delivered what became the longest inaugural address in our history. I spoke of the dangers of executive overreach, of the necessity of a government guided by law rather than by men, of the importance of Congress as the true voice of the people. I declared that no president must ever set himself above the Constitution, and that the Republic would endure only so long as liberty was guarded with vigilance. I spoke, too, of the nation's prosperity and its future. I urged investment in roads and canals to bind together distant regions, support for commerce and agriculture, and careful management of the people's treasury. I wished to see America grow strong not through conquest, but through unity and enterprise. When the address was concluded, I felt a deep sense of duty pressing upon me. My words had been long, but my heart was sincere. I believed that my presidency would be a time of renewal, of balance between the branches of government, of steady progress for the American people. Yet even as the applause faded and the crowd dispersed, I could not know how short my tenure would be. I had spoken with the conviction of one who expected to labor for years in service of the Republic. Fate, however, had written another ending to my story. But in that moment, on that cold March day, I was filled with resolve. I had come from the fields of Virginia, from the frontiers of Ohio, from the battlefields of the Northwest, to stand as President of the United States. My life's journey had reached its highest peak, and I was ready to serve the people with all the strength that remained to me. My presidency began with great hope and determination. I had long aspired to one day take the helm of the nation, guiding it with the wisdom gleaned from a lifetime of experience. However, the day of my inauguration was a sign of the challenges to come. The bitter March winds, the relentless cold, and the long inaugural address left me feeling more weary than ever before. From the start, I was committed to fostering an atmosphere of cooperation and respect within the government. Congress, still wary of the rise of the Whigs, needed assurance that the executive branch would fulfill its proper role in balanced governance. I met daily with my advisors, reviewing legislation and crafting policies aimed at strengthening the economy, improving infrastructure, and upholding the principles of liberty. Even in those initial days, I felt the immense weight of the office. Every decision, every word mattered. My hope was to proceed with caution, to avoid the missteps of my predecessors, and to leave the nation stronger than I found it. Yet, I would learn too late that time was not my ally. Only 3 weeks into my term, I fell gravely ill. It began with a chill, a simple malaise, but it quickly worsened. My physician struggled to understand my condition, for in our time, medicine was as much an art as it was a science. As the days passed, my strength waned. I could no longer summon the energy to rise from my bed, and the daily affairs of state became impossible to conduct. The irony was cruel. I had survived a lifetime of the harshest conditions. The frontier winters, the campaigns on the battlefield, the long marches. Yet it was in Washington that the greatest danger lay in a simple exposure to the cold and fatigue. I could feel my body failing, yet my mind remained alert. Eager to continue serving my country that I in my final days, I reflected on my life. I thought of the James River, of the forests of Ohio, of the soldiers who fought by my side, of the treaties I had signed, and of the nation that had entrusted me with its highest office. I found comfort in the knowledge that my career had been one of dedication, courage, and duty. Even if my presidency was short, my contributions to the Republic would endure. That on April 4th, 1841, after only 31 days in office, I passed from this world. My term was the shortest of any president, but in those days, I had strived to uphold the principles that had guided my entire life: honor, service, and loyalty to the Republic. My passing, though sudden, marked the end of a lifetime of service, from the battlefields of the frontier to the highest office in the land. Even though my time as president was tragically short, I hope my life and contributions to this country will be remembered. From my earliest days, I was dedicated to the Republic, whether on the battlefields of the Northwest Territory, in the halls of Congress, or in the territories I governed. Each effort was guided by the same principles: duty, courage, and resolve. History may judge me by the length of my presidency, but I hope people will remember me for the meaning of my service. I led soldiers in battle, I negotiated treaties, I defended frontier settlers, and I worked to maintain the balance of power within the government. I hope that future generations will see me as a man who sought justice, acted with integrity, and put the nation's interests above his own ambitions. The name Old Tippecanoe became a symbol in my time, and I trust it will endure as more than just a name for a battle. Let it represent the spirit of the frontier, the resilience of the founding fathers, and the unwavering will to defend liberty. That I know my presidency was brief, and I didn't live to carry out the plans and reforms I envisioned. Yet, even in that short time, I strove to embody the sense of duty and virtue every citizen should expect from their leaders. My sudden death reminds us that the office of the presidency, perhaps future generations will remember me differently. Some for my military victories, some for the brevity of my presidency, and others for the ideals I represented. I hope they see in my life a demonstration of dedication, courage in the face of adversity, and from the forests of Virginia to the rivers of the Northwest, from frontier forts to the White House, my journey always had one purpose: to serve the Republic to the best of my ability. Though my time in the highest office was short, my entire life was a service to the nation, and I believe that will be my life's work, that I hope my followers can learn from my example that courage, duty, and loyalty to the nation are the highest callings a person can answer, and that the strength of the Republic depends not only on one leader, but on the dedication of all its people.